A wooden gavel cracked against an oak block. 5 paper dollars changed hands in a Cheyenne livery stable. A tall, lean rancher in a dusty gray duster stepped up onto a small wooden platform and accepted a length of frayed white veil from the hand of a sweating circuit preacher. The veil was attached to a slim woman in a soiled traveling dress. She did not raise her face. She did not speak. She allowed herself to be led down off the platform by the hand the rancher offered. His name was Jeremiah Hale. He was 34 years old. He owned a small cattle operation on a creek 12 miles west of Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, in the spring of 1879. He had ridden into town that Saturday for a sack of flour and a wagon wheel. He had stopped at the livery stable for the wheel. He had walked into the back of the stable to find a bride auction in progress. He had bid once. He had won. He did not yet know that by the time he had hidden her in his root cellar and ridden back into town to find out who was searching for her, she would be gone, and her veil would be folded neatly on his pillow, and a name would be embroidered in red thread along the hem. Why had Augustus Rowe let his daughter be sold at a circuit preacher's bride auction in Cheyenne? Stay with me on this one. The circuit preacher running the auction was a man named Reverend Smithers. Reverend Smithers had a reputation in 3 counties for being a poor preacher and a worse swindler. He had been running bride auctions for 2 years up and down the territory line. The brides were always veiled. The buyers were always told the women were widows or orphans seeking a husband. The veils were never lifted at the auction. The papers, if any, were signed in pencil. The money went straight into a leather pouch Smithers wore under his coat. Nobody in 3 counties had ever seen Smithers preach a Sunday sermon to the same congregation twice. Jeremiah had not been planning to buy a bride. Jeremiah had bid $5 on the woman in the soiled traveling dress because he had seen, when he had walked into the stable, that the only other bidder was a fat-bellied freighter from a railroad camp who had been openly leering at the veil and reaching for his belt. The freighter had smelled of bad whiskey and worse intentions. Jeremiah had bid $5 to outbid the freighter and end the auction before the freighter could take her. The freighter had grumbled and walked out of the stable. Jeremiah had handed Reverend Smithers a $5 gold piece. Smithers had counted the coin twice and slid it into the leather pouch and tipped his hat. Now he led the veiled woman out of the stable and around to the side street where his buckboard wagon was hitched. He helped her up onto the seat. He swung himself up beside her. He clicked his tongue at the team. The buckboard pulled out of Cheyenne onto the long, rutted wagon road that ran west toward his homestead on Lone Creek. They rode in silence for 2 miles. At the top of the first long rise outside town, the woman lifted her veil with both hands. She looked at him for the first time. She had dark hair pulled back in a low bun. She had hazel eyes. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow. She had a sun-bronzed face that had spent more time outdoors than indoors. She was 26 or 27 years old. She was not a widow. She was not an orphan in the usual sense. She spoke. Her voice was steady. It was the voice of a woman who had been planning the words for 2 miles. "My father's name is Augustus Rowe," she said. Jeremiah's hands tightened on the reins. He stopped the team. The buckboard stood at the top of the rise in the long evening light. Augustus Rowe was the name engraved on the warrant nailed to the sheriff's wall in Cheyenne. The warrant was for $1,000 in federal silver, dead or alive. Augustus Rowe was a man who had robbed 2 railroad payrolls and killed 3 deputies in the last 12 months. Augustus Rowe was the most wanted man on the Wyoming Territory plains. The woman beside him was his daughter. Jeremiah Hale had come west to the Wyoming Territory in 1865 at the age of 20. He had been a Pennsylvania farm boy in the Union Army during the war. He had been at Antietam at 17. He had been at Gettysburg at 18. He had been at Petersburg at 19. He had carried a Springfield rifle and a leather haversack and a tintype of his mother through 3 years of mud and smoke. He had not gone home to Pennsylvania after the war. His father had died of cholera in 1864. His mother had moved to live with a sister in Ohio. The farm had been sold to pay back taxes. There had been nothing in Pennsylvania to go home to. He had ridden west with a small band of cavalry veterans to look at the land. He had stayed. He had homesteaded on Lone Creek in 1868. He had built a small cabin out of cottonwood and creek stone. He had built a barn. He had built corrals. He had started a herd of 50 head of cattle. He had run it up to 800 head by 1879. He had hired 3 quiet vaqueros from the New Mexico Territory who had drifted north looking for work. He had paid them fair wages. He had been a quiet, careful, hard-riding rancher for 11 years. He kept his accounts in a little black book. He paid his bills on time. He did not owe $1 to any man in Wyoming. He had not married. He had been in love in his second year on Lone Creek with a Cheyenne schoolteacher named Anna Carmody. Anna had been small and quick and had laughed easily and had read aloud to her schoolchildren from a battered copy of Robinson Crusoe. Anna had died of a fever in the winter of 1871 at the age of 24. Jeremiah had been with her for the last 3 days. He had been at her funeral. He had walked back to Lone Creek the day after the funeral and had not been in love since. He had been a lonely man for 8 years. He had also been a sensible man. He had not been planning to buy a bride at a livery stable auction. He had certainly not been planning to buy the daughter of Augustus Rowe. Now he sat on a buckboard wagon at the top of a long rise outside Cheyenne, with the daughter of Augustus Rowe on the seat beside him. He looked at her. She looked back. She did not flinch. "What is your name?" he said. "Esther," she said. "Esther Rowe. How old are you?" "I am 27. Why are you in a livery stable auction in Cheyenne?" She took a long breath. "My father," she said, "has been on the run for 14 months. The federal marshals know his face. They do not know mine. They have not been looking for a daughter. He has had me hidden, on and off, on a small ranch east of Laramie owned by an old friend of his. The friend has been a good man. The friend died 2 months ago of pneumonia. The friend's widow turned me out because she could not afford to feed me, and because she was afraid the marshals would search the ranch." She paused. "I rode south on a borrowed mule," she said. "The mule went lame outside Cheyenne. I walked the last 6 miles into town. I had $2 in my coat pocket and a small carpet bag with a Sunday dress and a Bible and a tin of pins. I needed a place to sleep. I needed food. I needed clothes that did not look like a ranch wife's. I needed a way to disappear without being recognized." She drew another breath. "A woman I met at the boarding house on the second night told me about Reverend Smithers," she said. "She told me Smithers ran bride auctions for women like me. She told me Smithers asked no questions and signed no papers. She told me Smithers would put a veil over my face and let me be married off to a rancher who would take me 12 miles into the country and feed me and clothe me and ask no questions. She told me my best chance was a quiet rancher who did not want a wife enough to ask my last name." She looked at him. "The freighter who bid against you," she said, "would not have been quiet. He would have taken me 3 blocks and beat me in an alley and taken back the bid money. I would not have survived the night." Jeremiah's jaw worked once. "You picked me," he said. "I picked the rancher who stepped between me and the freighter," she said. "I did not know what your name was. I did not care. I cared that you put a hand out for me and not for the bottle in your pocket." He nodded slowly. He clicked his tongue at the team. The buckboard rolled west. The road dipped down off the rise into a long sage flat. The sun was getting low. The shadows of the buckboard and the team grew long across the sage. A pair of antelope watched them from a quarter-mile out and then drifted off into the brush. They did not speak for another mile. Then he said, "I will hide you at my place tonight. I have a small root cellar under the floor of my cabin. I will hide you in the cellar. I will ride back into town tomorrow morning. I will find out from Sheriff Bridger, who is looking for the daughter of Augustus Rowe. I will find out what the marshals know. I will come back tomorrow night. We will decide what comes next. She did not speak for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you." He nodded. He did not look at her. They reached the Lone Creek cabin 2 hours after dark. The three vaqueros were at the bunkhouse. Jeremiah waved to them through the cookhouse window. He drove the buckboard around to the back of the cabin, where the moon could not show them. He helped Esther down. He led her into the cabin through the back kitchen door. He pulled aside a braided rag rug. He lifted a square trapdoor in the floor. He lit a lantern. He showed her the small root cellar beneath. The cellar was 6 feet deep and 8 feet square. It had a packed dirt floor and rough wood shelves stocked with potatoes and onions and mason jars of preserves. There was a small straw mattress along the back wall that Jeremiah had kept down there for emergencies. There was a workbench along the side wall with a small drawer of odds and ends his mother had left when she had visited in 1870. He helped her down the wooden ladder. He brought down a fresh wool blanket, a bowl of cold stew from the back of the stove, a small loaf of bread, a tin cup of water, and a candle in a brass holder. He set the candle on a shelf. He climbed back up the ladder. "I will leave the trapdoor closed and the rug over it," he said. "The vaqueros will not enter the cabin. They have their own bunkhouse. I will ride to town in the morning. I will be back by supper time tomorrow. Do not come up unless you hear my voice or you hear the cabin burning down around you." She nodded. He closed the trapdoor. He laid the rag rug back over it. He set the bowl of beans he had warmed for his own supper on the kitchen table and ate without much appetite. He went to bed early. He did not sleep well. The wind moved against the cabin walls and the boards creaked, and once around midnight he sat up in bed listening for a sound from beneath the floor and heard nothing. He rose at 4 in the morning. He saddled his bay gelding before the vaqueros were awake. He left a note on the cookhouse door for Manuel, the foreman, saying he was riding into Cheyenne for supplies. He rode out at sunrise. He made Cheyenne by noon. He tied his bay at the rail in front of the sheriff's office. He walked inside. Sheriff Bridger was at his desk. Bridger was a big man of 55 with a gray walrus mustache and a small, careful pair of reading glasses. He looked up. "Hail," he said. Sheriff Jeremiah said. He sat down across from Bridger. He said, "I rode into the livery stable yesterday for a wagon wheel. I walked into the back room and found Reverend Smithers running a bride auction. There was a veiled woman on the platform. There was a freighter from one of the railroad camps bidding on her. I outbid him by $5 and took the woman out to my buckboard before the freighter could get to her. I have brought her to my homestead." Bridger's eyebrows went up. "That is a strange story, Hale," he said. "I am not done," Jeremiah said. On the ride home, she lifted her veil. She told me her name. Her name is Esther Rowe. She told me her father is Augustus Rowe. I would like to know what the federal marshals know about her." Bridger sat very still. Then he reached slowly into the drawer of his desk. He pulled out a thin leather folder. He set it on the desk. He opened the folder. Inside the folder was a typed sheet on official territorial letterhead. The sheet was dated 3 weeks ago. The sheet was signed by U.S. Marshal Henderson of the Wyoming Territory Office. The sheet said, "Esther Rowe, age 27, dark hair, hazel eyes, scar above left eyebrow. Daughter of Augustus Rowe. Wanted as material witness in the federal investigation of the railroad payroll robberies of 1878. To be apprehended on sight. Not to be harmed. Considered cooperative. Reward of $500 federal silver for safe delivery to the U.S. Marshal's office in Laramie." Jeremiah read the sheet. He looked up at Bridger. "Material witness," he said. Bridger nodded. "Her father did not let her be sold at an auction," Bridger said quietly. "Her father has been dead for 6 weeks. He was killed in a small canyon east of Laramie by his own crew. The crew has been fighting over the railroad payroll silver." The marshal's office has been keeping the death quiet because there are still 2 outstanding members of the crew who have not been apprehended. Bridger turned the leather folder around. He pointed at the second page in the folder. The second page was a typed transcript of a deposition. The deposition was signed by a man named Will Carter, age 48, of Laramie, Wyoming. The deposition was taken on March 12, 1879, 3 weeks ago. The deposition said, "I am the foreman of the ranch east of Laramie, where Esther Rowe was being kept by her father's friend Daniel Bryce. Daniel Bryce died of pneumonia on February 14. Daniel's widow asked Esther to leave the ranch on March 1 because she was afraid the federal marshals would search the property. Esther left on a borrowed mule on the morning of March 2. I followed her at a distance for 2 days because Daniel had asked me, on his deathbed, to make sure she got safely to Cheyenne. Her mule went lame on March 4 outside Cheyenne. She walked the last 6 miles. She went to the boarding house run by a Mrs. Brown. She had $2 in her pocket. She intended to disappear into the bride auction circuit because her father's reputation is widely known, and she did not want to be hunted by the surviving members of the crew. She told me her plan in advance. I told her not to do it. She told me she had no other plan. I asked her to wait at the boarding house until I could send for the marshal. She agreed. I rode for the marshal at Laramie on the morning of March 5. I returned to Cheyenne on March 9 with 2 deputies. By the time we reached the boarding house, Esther had already been sold at the auction the previous Saturday. The deputies and I have spent the last 2 weeks searching for the rancher who bought her. We have not yet located him. Jeremiah set the deposition down. He looked up at Bridger. "She is a federal witness," he said. Bridger nodded. "The surviving members of the crew," Bridger said, "are looking for her. They know she was sold at the auction. They have been in town for the last week. They have been asking, very quietly, at every saloon and feed store. They have not yet found out who bought her. Reverend Smithers has been keeping that quiet because he is afraid of being prosecuted for his role in the auction. Reverend Smithers has been arrested as of yesterday afternoon and is in the back cell of this building." He paused. "The 2 crew members do not yet know your name," Bridger said. "They will know your name within 48 hours. They are watching the road into town. They are watching the livery stable. They will figure out which rancher bought her by tomorrow at the latest." Jeremiah breathed out slowly. Bridger said, "The U.S. Marshal's office is asking you to bring Esther into the federal courthouse in Laramie for protective custody. There is a deputized escort of 6 men leaving Cheyenne for Laramie at first light tomorrow morning. The escort will swing past your homestead at dawn. You will hand Esther over to the escort. The escort will deliver her safely to Laramie." Bridger looked at him steadily. "Hale," he said, "the $500 reward is yours." Jeremiah did not nod. He stood up. "I will think about it," he said. He walked out of the sheriff's office. He bought the wagon wheel he had originally come into town for 2 weeks ago. He bought a sack of flour. He bought a small new ladies' wool coat from the general store. He rode home. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. He reached Lone Creek at supper time. He unsaddled the bay. He led the bay into the corral. He pulled off the saddle blanket and laid it over the top rail. He gave the bay a quick rub with a twist of dry grass and turned him loose. The other horses came up to the rail to watch. He carried the new lady's wool coat in his left arm and the sack of flour over his shoulder. He walked into the cabin. He set the flour on the kitchen table. He laid the coat on the kitchen table beside it. He pulled the rag rug aside. He lifted the trapdoor. He spoke down into the cellar. "Esther," he said. "It is Jeremiah. I am home." There was no answer. He lowered himself down the ladder with the lantern. The cellar was empty. The straw mattress was made up neatly. The wool blanket was folded at the foot of the mattress. The candle in the brass holder had been blown out. The bowl of stew was empty. The bread was gone. The tin cup was empty and turned upside down on a shelf. The veil from the auction was folded neatly on the pillow. Jeremiah picked the veil up. He held it under the lantern. Along the hem of the veil, in small precise stitches in red thread, was the name Esther Mary Catherine Rowe Hale. She had embroidered her name as a Hale. She had used his last name. She had sewn the stitches with red thread she must have found in the cellar workbench drawer, where his mother's old sewing tin had been sitting unused for 8 years. He climbed back up the ladder. He walked outside. He walked to the corral. His bay gelding was the only horse missing. No, the bay gelding was there. He had ridden the bay back from town an hour ago. He had unsaddled the bay himself. But his small chestnut mare named Patience was missing. Patience was a gentle, steady mare he had bought from a Cheyenne livery 2 years ago. Patience had been ridden by the Methodist preacher who had come out to bless the cattle in 1877. Patience knew every trail west of Lone Creek out to the Great Salt Basin. Esther had taken Patience. She had taken his second saddle from the tack room. She had taken a wool bedroll. She had taken a small leather satchel of trail provisions from the cookhouse pantry. She had not taken any of his money. His money was in a tin under the bed in the cabin. The tin had not been touched. She had left the veil. She had left him her name. He stood at the corral fence for a long, quiet minute. He went back into the cabin. He sat down at the kitchen table with the veil in his hands. He read the red embroidered hem. Esther Mary Catherine Rowe Hale. She had given herself his name. She had left. He did not know why. Then he saw, on the corner of the kitchen table, a small folded paper that had not been there when he had walked in. She had left it under the new lady's wool coat. He had laid the coat down on top of it without noticing. He unfolded the paper. The paper was a single line written in a careful schoolteacher's hand, and beneath that, 3 more lines in the same careful script. The paper said, "Sheriff Bridger told you about the escort. The escort cannot reach me. The 2 remaining crew members will know your name by tomorrow. They will burn your cabin and shoot your vaqueros and find me anyway. I cannot be the reason your home burns. I have ridden west toward Salt Lake. I have changed my name. I have written it on the hem of the veil so that one of us at least knows it. If a marshal comes asking, tell him I was already gone when you rode in. Forgive me, Esther." Jeremiah set the folded paper down. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He did not weep. He had not wept in 8 years, since Anna Carmody. He did not weep now. He picked up the veil. He folded it carefully into a square. He carried it into the bedroom. He laid it on the chest of drawers, next to a small framed daguerreotype of Anna. The 2 pieces of cloth and glass sat side by side in the lamplight, and for a long minute he stood looking at them, and then he turned away. He walked back to the kitchen. He brewed a cup of black coffee. He sat at the table with the cup of coffee. He thought. In the morning he rose at 3. He woke Manuel and the other 2 vaqueros at 4. He told them everything. Manuel listened with his arms folded. Manuel was a short, broad man of 40 with a black mustache and an old scar across the back of his left hand from a bull elk. Manuel had been on Lone Creek for 9 years. Manuel did not interrupt. When Jeremiah was done, Manuel said, "There are 2 men. They will come up the road. They will not come at night because they do not know the road. They will come at first light tomorrow. They will not come today because they are still in Cheyenne tonight asking questions." He paused. "We will be ready," Manuel said. "Esther will be 3 days west by then. She is on Patience. Patience knows the trail to Salt Lake. Patience has been ridden by my cousin Manuel 2 summers in a row. Esther will be safe at the Mormon mission in Salt Lake. The mission takes in any woman who arrives alone. They will not ask her name." Jeremiah looked at him. "You knew where she was going," Jeremiah said. "She told me on the morning ride yesterday," Manuel said. "She came up into the cookhouse for breakfast. I did not know who she was. She did not say. I gave her a cup of coffee and a biscuit. She told me she would be leaving today and asked which trail led to Salt Lake and how long the trail was. I told her. She thanked me. She went back into the cabin. I did not know I had spoken with the daughter of Augustus Rowe until you walked into the bunkhouse just now. Manuel paused. She is a good woman, Manuel said. She did not ask me to lie. She did not ask me to help her. She asked me how long the trail was. I told her. She left on her own. Jeremiah nodded. He sent Manuel's youngest brother Tomas at a hard gallop to Cheyenne in the dark with a note for Sheriff Bridger. The note said the 2 crew members would arrive at the homestead at first light. The note asked the sheriff to bring the deputized escort to the top of the rise outside the ranch by dawn. The note said Esther was already gone and would not be at the cabin and would not need an escort and was not to be pursued. Tomas made Cheyenne by midnight. He woke Bridger at his house. He gave him the note. He waited while Bridger read it twice. Bridger pulled on his boots. The 2 surviving members of the crew rode up the road to Lone Creek at first light the next morning. They did not reach the cabin. Sheriff Bridger and the deputized escort of 6 men met them at the top of the rise outside the homestead at dawn. The 2 crew members surrendered without a fight. They had been outnumbered 6-2, and they had not expected the escort. They had been planning to find a quiet ranch with a single rancher and 3 Mexican hands. They had not been planning to find 6 federal deputies in a half-circle across the road, with rifles cocked. They were taken back to Cheyenne in irons. They were tried in the federal court in Laramie in the autumn. Esther Rowe was not called as a witness. She did not appear. The deposition of the foreman, Will Carter, and a deposition of a bank clerk in Laramie were enough to convict both men on 3 counts each. They each received 20 years in the federal prison in Wyoming. Reverend Smithers was tried in the same season for fraud and for running unlicensed marriages and for selling women without their consent. He received 7 years and was sent to the same prison. He did not preach again. Sheriff Bridger came out to Lone Creek a week after the trial. Bridger sat at Jeremiah's kitchen table and drank a cup of coffee and laid a leather pouch on the table. That is the $500, Bridger said. The marshal's office sent it through. She was delivered safely, as far as anyone can prove. The mission at Salt Lake sent a note last month. A woman named Hale arrived in late March. The note did not say more. Jeremiah looked at the pouch. He pushed it back across the table. I will not take that money, he said. Spend it on the freighter's victims if you can find them. There were others before Esther. Bridger nodded. He picked up the pouch and put it back in his coat. He drank the rest of his coffee. He stood up. You did right, Hale, Bridger said. I do not always get to say that to a man. He went out. Jeremiah Hale rode west to Salt Lake in the spring of 1880, 12 months after the auction. He took Patience, who had come home on her own the previous autumn from somewhere west, thin and saddle-galled and limping on a stone bruise but alive. The Mormons had turned her loose when Esther had reached the mission. Patience had walked the 800 miles back to Lone Creek alone, following her own scent trail, arriving at the cabin one September morning at sunrise. Jeremiah had taken that for an answer. He found Esther at the Mormon mission. She was working in the mission kitchen as a cook. She had grown her hair longer. She had taken the surname Hale on the mission's records. She had told the mission women that her husband had died of fever on the trail. She had been waiting, she told him quietly, for someone to come and tell her she did not have to be a widow anymore. He had taken her hand. They had been married 3 weeks later, in a small Methodist chapel in Salt Lake, by a quiet preacher who had asked no questions and had signed the papers properly. They had ridden back to Lone Creek in the early summer. They had been married 51 years. They had 3 children together. Their oldest daughter, born in 1881, they named Anna Catherine Hale. It was enough. It was enough for a life. It was enough.